At the end of the day, for me personally, I feel hugely privileged to even have the opportunity to work with my parents. Was already a massive bonus. I try and keep as much perspective as possible. So in times when that stress is coming hard and the emotions are bubbling up and, you're feeling that tension, which is bound to come in succession discussions, I sat back and, thought, well, we're not doing bad here. We're doing all right, aren't we, between us? And that is the truth. We are.
You are listening to the Exploring Family Business podcast, brought to you by Mazars. I'm your host, Natalie Wright, Head of Family Business at Mazars UK. And having worked extensively with family businesses for a number of years, I'm keen to support this valuable sector of our society. At Mazars, we believe there is nothing more personal than a family business. Every family and every business are unique. So we look forward to sharing knowledge, insights, and practical tips for those navigating the unique issues that arise from being in business with family. Now on with this week's show. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Exploring Family Business podcast with Mazars. Succession planning, or more specifically a lack of it, is the number one reason family-owned businesses fail to survive. For some families, there is a conscious decision to bring family ownership to an end, whether that's through an external sale of the business or by engaging the wider team of employees who can ultimately become the owners. But for those who intend to pass on the business to the next generation, assumptions about how the transition will work without clear communication and an agreed structure can have a devastating effect on the continuity of the business as well as personal relationships. In 2010, Gavin Howarth started work in his family's second-generation business, Howarths, a HR and employment law firm based in West Yorkshire. The business was founded by his parents in 2003, following his father's 30-year successful career in the police force. And in 2013, Gavin became the managing director, following lots of open discussions and careful planning. His parents subsequently implemented the transition of ownership to Gavin, which saw him become the majority shareholder. As a NextGen leader, Gavin has had to find his own management and leadership style so that he could remain authentic and feel confident, whilst allowing him to maintain a good relationship with his father and build on the values that created the business. Now one of the most active members of the family business community on LinkedIn and in the Yorkshire region, Gavin is passionate about sharing his own experience and supporting other business leaders so that their businesses can thrive. Hi, Gavin. Thanks for joining us today.
Morning. No problem at all. I'm looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thanks for giving up your time. I think it might be useful, actually, if we just start as well by saying we're not going to cover the backstory to how the business got started today and kind of that first 10 years, I guess, of the business running, because you've recently done a brilliant episode for Family Business Podcast that Benjamin Brain interviewed you for. And I thought that gave some brilliant insights of the last 19 years. So I will include a link to that episode in the show notes, actually. But there were some key points in that episode, which, you, your father, Andy, and I discussed recently as well. And with the theme of our third season of the podcast being about that transition from now gen to next gen, I think it would be useful for the listeners if we homed in on that transition of ownership and also your role as a leader, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. The juicy bits.
All the juicy bits, the bits everyone wants to hear. And I understand, you and Andy, your father, you always worked on the basis that you would come into the business and with a view, I'm guessing, at some point to take over. But did you expect to be the managing director at 27?
Good question. I suppose I hoped that might be the case. And I think as a family, we had a collective ambition, vision, dream, if you like, that we could achieve succession. But as you know better than anyone, there's no guarantees of that. And there's a lot of water that has to go under the bridge before you get there. So yes, we talked about the business very early on when I was young, and particularly, and mum and dad more latterly in their careers, we talked about the hope that we could achieve succession and that would it work for us all. And I'd step up and be managing director. And I was very sort of ambitious when I was young. I still am now, but I was very ambitious and wanted to push on and get to the top as quick as possible, I suppose. So I hoped that would happen. But yeah, I mean, I suppose I always try and view it that age is only a number. There's no barrier. If your dad has always said, to be fair to him, if you're good enough, you're old enough. So, mum and dad were very gracious in that respect, and it just worked, irrespective of it sounding quite young. It was the right thing for all of us, I think.
I imagine it was, it's a lot of responsibility, but also quite an exciting time to be able to lead a business. And I'm guessing, take over from your father, but still have him there as well to support you.
Yeah, exactly right. And like I referred to earlier, I'll speak for myself rather than anyone else, but in my 20s, I'm thinking I'm king of the world and the best businessman going, and I remember I was pushing and knocking at the door, I think, before I was 27, with all sorts of ideas and things that we could do and how I think it should be done. And Dad was probably getting sick of me, actually, as time went on. And then I became the MD at 27. In our first year of me becoming MD, we had quite a good year, quite a good financially successful year. And I remember at the end of that year going to mum and dad and saying, right, I'm ready to run the show, pass me the business or let me buy it off you. I'm ready to go. Obviously, I'm the next Alan Sugar here. I'm ready, which is, looking back, a bit ridiculous. And I'm now 36 and I look back at my 27-year-old self and think, what a nonsense that was. Mum and dad knocked me back, rightly so, and I proved myself a little bit longer than just 12 months, which was absolutely right. But I suppose it gives a little picture into sort of my ambition. And I think as you get older, you realise the more you learn, the more you realise you don't know and become a little bit wiser. But yeah, I do look back cringing a little bit at that. But then again, it's the same. The other side of that coin is it's that ambition and self-belief that you need to be able to run a business. And there's no doubt about that. So it's not all bad.
I guess, from what you said there as well, it's creating that balance, isn't it, between giving the next generation that opportunity and allowing them to maybe fail sometimes as well, but knowing that you're there to support them, not that you're just going to swoop in and say, right, if things go wrong, we'll make everything all right. But as you said, you had a great year, wanted to do everything, take it over and lead it, but actually having your dad there to give you some sage advice around, there will be some tough times ahead. It's not always plain sailing. I imagine that was really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, mum and dad have got their own, financial ambitions and wants and needs out of the business. So it has to be right for every party involved in the transaction and the relationship. But yes, it's great for me to have that support, and to have mum and dad in the background. And although now they're not technically a part of the business, they are in lots of ways. They're the biggest stakeholders in the business and still involved, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But yes, and I've become a father myself in the last 4 years to a couple of children. And it is difficult, isn't it? Letting them have their head and not intervening and not doing things your way and letting them fail and letting them fall over. And, it's all the same analogies in business are true, and especially when the business was essentially mum and dad's baby. And I come in, have these ideas, some of which they may have tried themselves before or not believe in, and also I'm their son, eldest son. So allowing me to have my head and sit back and see that happen, I think must be very difficult. I appreciate only a small part of it now, having my own children, but must be hugely difficult. But to be fair to mum and dad, they've always been absolutely brilliant in that. I mean, dad still says that he's a thorn in my side, and those are his words. And and he does have his two penneth every now and then, which is absolutely natural and absolutely fine. But in the main, brilliant.
And that transition then from, I guess, minority to majority shareholder, it happened over a number of years, I believe. So can you talk me through how your roles changed over that time in terms of leading the business, but also maybe how your relationship has evolved with your parents as well during that period?
Yes. So I think the conversation around succession probably took the best part of 5 years. It was something that we would touch upon, have a little conversation, and then it had sort of quietened down for 3-6 months. And dad got cancer in between, which was a very scary time for us all. And we've had COVID as well in between that. So it took us many years to achieve succession. And my role has changed significantly throughout that time. I qualified as an employment law solicitor, joined the business advising SMEs on employment law. And, incrementally over time, I'm in a position now where I don't do any advisory work and I just lead the business. That's been tricky, changing, my role changing, becoming off the tools, if you like, and into working on the business. And yeah, I've had some real moments navigating that. And my relationship with my parents has always been really strong. We're a very close family. We speak very openly, which I think is really important. And we did have some difficult moments in those early days. There's no two ways about that. When you're talking about finances, personal ambitions, business, all that type of stuff, interlaid with personal relationship, grandparent, grandchildren, going for tea after work, all that meshed in together, it can become complicated. And what might just be a very normal business statement to someone else suddenly takes on a lot more weight when it's to a family member, and parents in my case. So we had some tough times at the beginning, but I think what we did well is take our time, and we were very, I suppose it's not a word you'd associate with business much, but very gentle with each other and with the timing and patient. And, when people needed, any parties to the transaction needed space to come to terms with a certain proposition or idea, emotionally get used to it. And then we'd allow that time and space, which I think was really important. If you were selling to a third party and it was a trade sale, and you sat across the table and it's transactional and each party is just trying to get the best, whatever they want out of it and the best deal. Whereas it's very different in our case. It was much more thinking about the other party, actually. I think we were both very, very conscious and very, very considerate to what the other party wants. Dad said a few times he never wanted to overcharge me, if you like, as a son. I never wanted to not give mum and dad their fair dues for the business. So we were always very considerate of each other's needs and took our time, which I think paid dividends in the end.
I think that's a really valuable point actually to touch on there because, and we won't talk specifically about the numbers at all, but if thinking about kind of the financial side of the transaction, because a business doesn't usually change hands for free. And, clearly if there's a third party buyer, then there's an element of kind of competitive tension there when it comes to value and things. But where you're looking at both sides balancing their objectives, so in this case, parents to exit and support whatever they want to do next in life, but then you needing the right figure to work for you personally, because you're taking on the risk then, and also the business. But also be mindful that you have to sit down at the end of the day, perhaps have dinner together or around a table. How did you go about approaching those discussions then around value and that mechanism for the funding of the purchase of the shares?
So incrementally, bit by bit, as context, neither of us had done anything like this before. So neither of us have, bought a business or sold one or been in any transaction like that. So I suppose we were quite green in that respect. So what we actually did was involve our company accountant and the accountant my dad used when he set up the business. So we had two accountants who helped us talk about valuation, how you might do it, what factors would be considered, because we didn't know any of this. And the two of them worked together. They formed a relationship as well. But we had the perfect mix, really, because we had, very knowledgeable accountants and could advise on the tax side and the way to do it. But with having the accountant involved who first started the business with my dad, it was around at that point, that was important because there was a huge amount of trust there. And because he understood the journey we'd been on from the very beginning and had been involved in business conversations with my dad back in 2003. And so he understood the family and the business implicitly. Like you say, when you're doing a trade negotiation, it's at arm's length. You don't know the other side often. You're doing a commercial transaction. So emotion can be cut out of it. We're here to do a deal. Let's get it done. Not like that at all in a family business. You're here to do a deal, but the emotion is huge, absolutely huge. So I think everything has to be dealt with very gently. And the accountants did that for us. Just interestingly, we did have a period where we decided to get lawyers involved, almost to act on each other's side, if you like. And we stopped that really quickly because it made it feel much more acrimonious than it needed to be. And it just wasn't us at all. So we tried it, got lawyers involved, and then we got rid of that because it felt very much us and them, when really me and dad really wanted to do this collaboratively and together. So in the end, it was essentially me, dad, mum in the background, which we might come on to, and then the two accountants. And then at the very end, we got the lawyers involved. But by then it was a case of taking to the lawyers, here's the deal. We've got it on a spit and a handshake. We're all happy. We've all spent a lot of time coming to this. Let's get it written up now. So we sort of took it to the lawyers at the very last moment.
So I guess giving yourselves that time, because you mentioned 5 years, which, some people might be thinking, gosh, that's a long period of time. But, it's not you're working on that entirely for 5 years. But I guess it's from that first seed up and discussions, as the business evolves, as you evolve as people as well, and start to think about your own objectives, it's giving you that plan and structure that you could start building on. So then, as you say, when you use the two accountants, they could look at it from a facts and figures perspective. I'm sure talk about the tax and other things and all the practical stuff, whilst you could talk between you what works for us on a personal level as well as the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, now I think about it, there was probably, I'm sort of shooting from the hip and generalizing slightly, but there was probably a 2-year period of just the family talking about it. Before then, perhaps another 2-year period of the family and some professional advisors talking about it. Before then, we eventually got it done. So, because in those early days, that first 2 years, you're wrestling with huge emotional concepts. Now, we didn't get any outsiders to help us out on that, but I can imagine some people might need help and assistance on that. But, thoughts of, for mum and dad, I imagine, thoughts of not owning the business which they started, just to sit down and think about, right, what does that look like? What do I do after? Am I definitely ready to do that? If I was, how would it look? Is Gav definitely ready? Will it work? All these, that takes time. You can't rush those thoughts. Because the last thing we wanted to do, and we said this quite a few times throughout, is do any deal, get it all signed off, and then anyone be left with any inkling of regret or, I wish I hadn't done that way, or we should have thought about this, or, do I feel comfortable really? And I think if you go at a certain pace and you maybe try and rush the conversation slightly, or, then I think you're at risk of that. And that's all right on a trade sale, maybe, because it's a commercial transaction. You enter it as you enter it, eyes open. But you don't want that with your family, because what we wanted to do is go to the lawyer's offices, have the glass of champagne, sign off the deal on the Wednesday. And then Wednesday night, I'll go around to mum and dad's with my kids, and we'll have a meal and a laugh and talk about Leeds United and the rest of it. So that's what we were trying to achieve, is let's do this commercial transaction, but make sure at the end of it, ultimately, we love each other to bits and we've still got a relationship that's as strong as ever. I'm
guessing then the main part of all of this was just that really clear and honest communication between all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. It's been open, honest, clear, transparent. I said a few times throughout the deal that I would walk away from the business before I fell out with mum and dad. And I meant that because I'd back myself to, I qualified as a solicitor. I'd back myself to go and get another job somewhere and build an half-decent life for, me and my family. I'd do that before I fell out with mum and dad about business, and because it's not worth it in the long run. So, but we never needed to in the end, but we did all start from that premise. And I think that's important. The values of where we started from as a family was, we're not going to fall out about it. No way. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. If it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. But let's explore it. Let's see if it can work. Let's see if we can all achieve our ambitions and aims. And thankfully, we got there in the end.
The other side of the succession planning then, and you alluded to it before, I guess there's an emotive side around the planning where, I've seen it with a lot of clients and we've supported them through this in the past, of getting to that mindset of what does life look like after the business, what comes next. And so that's a big part of the planning, particularly for the generation who are exiting. But from a business planning perspective and thinking about kind of the soft skills that you might have needed to incorporate for the team and for you really moving into that full leadership position, did you get any support for yourself, the wider kind of senior team, in terms of being able to allow that transition to happen in a way that gave you the responsibility and leadership role and everyone else to buy into it as well?
I suppose, yes, incrementally. I think the thing about our journey was I'd been managing director of the business for 8 or 9 years before we did, the actual shareholding sale. So I had already been running the business for a period of time and had already, been on a journey of learning what it means to be MD and the skills required and bringing the team on board. So, but I mean, don't get me wrong, throughout that journey, I've had plenty of mentoring, training to try and transition into the role and become the leader that the business needs. But I did have the advantage of it not being just a sort of line in the sand, right, you're now the owner, good luck. It wasn't really like that because I'd already had quite a few years doing it before we actually made the official ownership transition. So when the ownership transition came and I went to be an 80% shareholder, the majority shareholder, it felt there was a change in my thinking. Don't get me wrong, because, you then, whoa, wow, like, right, it really is on me now because, I own the business, the personal guarantee changes and all that stuff. But it wasn't a huge thing because I'd already assumed, taken that leadership position for a number of years before. So that did help the transition.
And you'd talked to me previously about some personality profiling that you and your dad had undertaken. And I'm assuming, some other members of the wider team also got involved in it. Could you just talk me through that? Because I thought that really interesting insights came out of that.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was quite funny, actually. So we didn't get the personality profile done to help us achieve succession. We were just doing it anyway. But in fact, looking back, it definitely did, which is interesting. Yeah, so we got this insights personality profiling done, which some of your audience may have heard of. There's plenty of different ones, DISC and Myers-Briggs, etc. But the one we did was Insights, and me, Dad, and Tracy, our finance director, got it done. Long story short, I came out at, say, a strong blue, and my dad came out as a strong yellow. Now, on a circle of personality profiles, that puts us at the exact opposite of each other, the exact opposite. And the way this model works is the further away that you are pitched from the center of the circle towards the outside, the more strong you are in those characteristics, let's say. So, and me and Dad were both at the far end of each color. So we got this back and reviewed it. And it was just so interesting because in my profile, it would talk about how to speak to someone who is at the opposite end of the circle from you, which would be my dad. So bring it to real life. So my dad is a yellow. So a yellow would be like inspirational, storyteller, perhaps like moves from one subject to another, quite quickly and quite exuberant and all that type of stuff. Blue, quite boring actually, probably, but very methodical, detailed, process, that type of stuff. A lot of lawyers tend to be blue for that reason. So you can see there's two opposite ends of the spectrum. So when I would have a conversation with Dad, I'd go into the conversation and into his office and be ready to talk in a way which was very ordered, methodical. I want to do the detail, etc. Dad's coming probably from the opposite. So I'd go in and sit down. No, Dad, I just want to talk through this issue and start talking about it in order. And Dad would be like, he'd listen to maybe at first point and then say, anyway, Gav, you want a cup of tea while we're halfway through this? Let's get some. And did you Leeds United at weekend? And let me just quickly talk to you about another subject that we're talking about, and whatever it is, But very inspirational, very storytelling. And then he'd go and tell me a story which was really funny and I enjoyed, but it wasn't anything to do with what I'd come in for. And so, but that personality profiling raised our awareness of that's just the type of people we are, and vice versa. If Dad comes and speaks to me, he might apply that model, and I'd be like, oh, Dad, just tell me the detail, what exactly in this order, and, so I can get it in my mind and be very methodical about it. But once you understand that and appreciate it, then it makes your the way you communicate with each other much easier, because if I'm going to go speak to Dad, I know that's going to be the case, and I can be relaxed about it. I can, find other ways of having the conversation in the right way, and he knows as well. And we've now found a rhythm with each other where it works perfectly, despite us being opposite ends of a personality spectrum. And I think in hindsight, whilst we didn't do it deliberately, that helped us on the journey to succession. It really did, because we had that awareness and openness with each other.
Just what you've said there about the awareness. I mean, thinking about, succession planning discussions and how emotive they are, if you have that awareness to think about how the other person might interpret information, whether you're talking about a decision on a day-to-day basis or those bigger decisions about who will own the business, who's making, decisions about where we're going in the future, it must be incredibly valuable now when you look back.
Definitely, definitely. And there were moments where, Dad would know, for example, if he said something to me about the deal, I'd need 24 hours to think about it. And I won't react. I won't do anything. I'd need to go home, sleep on it. And in fact, Dad's quite similar in that respect. But again, if you know that, you're aware of it and you cater for it and you work around each other and you understand that, yeah, like you said, people think in certain ways and need certain things to be able to process the information. So I think the more self-awareness you can get, for one, and then the more awareness of the other people that you're working with, for two, it's just bound to help the whole transition go smoother.
What you've said as well about the differences in personalities, I often do hear that when we're talking with kind of second generation of family businesses as well, particularly when they're thinking about, founding generation, they started the business, usually that entrepreneurial spirit that, they see it, they live it, they breathe it. And what you often find is then second generation thinking, do I have the right skill set? Am I going to be entrepreneurial? Because obviously to get it off the ground, that had to be there at the start. There was some inherent risk. Have you ever found yourself in that position where you've looked at your father, obviously quite different personality types in the way you go about things? Did that make you question how you might lead moving forward?
No, probably didn't have worries about that per se. But one thing I've said a lot and I'm very aware of is Dad, I would regard, and Mum as well, as very entrepreneurial. And Dad started, a couple of businesses since. And those entrepreneurial spirits of, for Dad, I joke about it, but the harder and more impossible something seems, the more excited he gets and the more he wants to do it, and prove people wrong and launch things. And he almost needs it to be difficult to get out of bed and, for it to engage him. And I've got so much respect for Mum and Dad and any other entrepreneurs who can go out and, against all odds, the financial backing, the risk, the worry, all that. And I've said to Dad a few times, I'm not sure I could have done that. I just don't know if I'd have had the gumption to go and risk it all and take those risks. So I've learned a lot from watching Dad do that and do it with Howarths, but then do it with other businesses as well since. And by the same token, growing a business from a small business into a more medium size and then hopefully touch wood a bigger one, that requires a different skill set again, more strategic and processes, systems and people and all that type of stuff. And I think that I'm certainly in that, more suited to that, I think, than entrepreneurial. So in a way, I think we're lucky. We're lucky that we sort of have those traits. Dad is what I would call the entrepreneur. I've since come on and maybe helped with the leadership part of it. But we were lucky, I think, to have those two contrasting skill sets, I suppose. And I think we've probably both learned off each other a lot, but certainly me off Dad.
Thinking about then people who aren't necessarily at the forefront of the business on a day-to-day basis, at least from other people's eyes. I'm thinking more about your mum here, because obviously a lot of people will say, have you learnt this from your dad? How did you and your dad work together? What role did your mum play then as you moved through that transition, and also supporting your dad as he had to learn to take a step back on the day-to-day?
Left the business, the substantive role, soon after I joined. I don't know if that was deliberate, actually, in hindsight, but we didn't actually have a huge crossover between us.
Was that in 2010, then, was that?
Yeah, not long after that. So Mum had come out of the business, the substantive role, and I'll say why I'm keep referring to it like that, because she came away from a substantive role as FD, supporting Dad with the numbers, took a big step back and did her own things away from the business. But she remained heavily sort of emotionally connected to the business. And during the succession and the transition, I think it's fair to say that Mum probably found it more difficult than Dad with the family element. So I think me and Mum, maybe between us, found it quite difficult to talk about business. Whereas me and Dad, maybe more naturally, Dad was still in the business. We'd got into a rhythm of young bull and old bull, and we'd find ways of talking about business and separating the two. And we managed to do that quite well. It was more difficult with Mum because, I don't know, maybe a mother-son relationship, but so Mum would often find it difficult to talk business, and I would as well. So it often came through Dad, which put Dad in a difficult position sometimes. But Mum was very, as you can imagine, it was her baby as much as it was Dad. She was very emotionally connected to the business. And in answer to your question, I'm sure she did support Dad a lot in the transition and what it might look like going forward. But she also had her own views and her own wants and aspirations and wants from the deal and all that type of stuff. And mum is, talk about like, mum is ultra savvy, like nothing passes mum. So in fact, she only WhatsApped me at the weekend telling me there was a spelling mistake on our website, on the Howarths website, which didn't surprise me whatsoever. Like, fair play, we'll get on it. And she said, do you want me to review it for you and have a little look? I said, yeah, go on, please. Because she's got that eye for detail. Nothing passes her. Really savvy. And, mum's, still a massive stakeholder in the business as much as dad. And in fact, she works for the Howarth Foundation, which my dad runs, which is our charity. So dad's convinced her to do a little bit more time in the Howarth Foundation. So we'll see how them two get on working together. It's been a while.
It's interesting to, you've talked about, they've obviously got quite different personality traits as well of your mum and dad, before talking about yourself and your dad. So how did you manage that dynamic then as you got into some of those difficult conversations? Because, you've done the profiling with yourself and your dad, you could think about kind of how you deal with that. But a lot of that is in the context of you're probably there day to day in the office together. Whereas from your mum's perspective, she's not there day to day. So how did you deal with those conversations?
Yeah, it was trickier. I think what was important when speaking about business with mum is to try make it feel relaxed. So when me and dad were having business conversations, it'd be in the office, often in the boardroom, suited and booted, with a big bookshelf of law books behind us. And as a business, you might envisage a business conversation going. What would tend to happen with mum is I might be dropping Grace off on a Tuesday morning for her to babysit, and we'd be swapping car seats. And we might just have a little snippet of a conversation relaxed outside as we're swapping, the car seats. Oh, about this email that I just sent about the business deal. This is kind of what I meant on it, or this is what we're aiming for. And oh yeah, no, I understand. It's just this, or, so we'd have a little, very relaxed, different environment, little conversation, big hug afterwards and before, and just very careful to make sure that it didn't become in any way acrimonious or difficult. And again, that goes back to the values piece, that we were all in it for the right reasons, loved each other to bits, cared for each other, and just did it very gently and respectfully and patiently until everyone would, we'd almost do it in stages where we'd be talking about a certain thing, whether it might be a tax point or, or I don't know, company cars or what's going to happen with this. And we'd just talk about one issue, resolve that, wait until everyone's totally comfortable with what's been resolved and where we got to on that before we then moved on to another, issue. And we didn't sort of plan to do it that way, but I think that's how it panned out, where we just took our time and waited until everyone was fully comfortable with it. And that very much included mum. Whereas me and dad might do it in the business more formally, and I suppose I say more formally, but, in the business, mum would pass, speak through dad, and or we'd manage to have little conversations, just more relaxed outside of work, almost incidentally to what we were there to do in any event. So it just didn't feel as businessy.
Sounds like you worked hard to really make it an inclusive process, really.
I suppose we did, really, in hindsight. Yeah, when you talk about it, I suppose we did try and do that. Maybe not as deliberate as it sounds now, but it worked.
You're not the only shareholder of the business now. I understand there's two non-family shareholders who are really key members of your team. And I don't know if you find this when you speak with other family businesses, but I know lots of families struggle at the idea of, ownership being outside the family. So it'd be good to get your perspective on the positive impact that that's had for the business and for the wider team, and, how you went about those conversations. Was it to incentivize, to grow the business? What was kind of the strategy around that?
Yeah, so I'm an 80% shareholder, and then we have Tracy, our finance director, who owns 15%, and Charlotte, our legal director, who owns 5%. Tracy has been with the business longer than I have, for maybe 17 years now, 17 years. One of the almost not the very first member of staff, but not far off, joined from school. So Tracy is almost regarded as family, to be honest. And Charlotte's not too dissimilar. Charlotte's joined the business the year after me, so 11 years ago. And both have, been on the journey of seeing us go from, a smaller business to where we are now. All the trials and tribulations that come with that business growth and journey. But we didn't have any hesitation as a family to include Tracy and Charlotte in the ownership because they almost feel like family. And this feeling of family isn't exclusive to those with the name Howarth. It's almost all the team that have worked, that continue to work at Howarths, and very much feels like a big extended family. We've never been of the mindset of it's just about those with the name and no one else can come in. And it's never been that really. It's just those who have contributed to the success of the business in the main, putting it simply. And Tracy and Charlotte, have been massive in that respect. So I've been rewarded as a result. And of course, there's the commercial side of it of incentivizing and keeping the guys, sort of motivated and tied into the success of the entire operation. And so there's all that stuff as well. But there was no hesitation about those guys being in the fold, if you like.
I'm coming back again to that point about inclusivity. And, I get that in everything that I've seen you put out on social media, on your website. Even when I've seen any members of your team posting anything, it just, that family connection that ties you all together, that you just live and breathe it.
Yeah, we were just talking about it this morning, actually. We've got our end of year due on Friday, so we'll get to celebrate another good year and all be together. And, we love these events and moments. And, there's so many, it's sort of from our family to yours in a way, because all the guys here obviously have their own families, and a lot have grown their families whilst they've been here. And we've all gone on that journey together of new children. And we keep joking about the next thing, business idea will be a creche at Howarths for all the new arrivals that have come. But it is, a sort of a big family thing. You sort of hesitate to say it in a way because it sounds very cheesy and trite, and a lot of people will say it. A lot of companies will say it, but it does seem to apply here, I think.
It definitely comes through, and, I don't think that's by accident either. And clearly there's been lots of effort on both sides to make that transition that you've gone through over this kind of last 10 years successful. It's not happened by accident, but I imagine there's a lot of people listening who can completely resonate with the position that you were in back in 2013, coming into that managing director role, and then thinking ahead about where you want to be in the business. And I think, it's a tricky one, but if you could distill it, is the one piece of advice that you gave to the now gen and the next gen who are starting to embark on their own succession plan?
That's a good one. I suppose I've said it a few times in different ways, but the first things that come to mind, patience, for one. I think everyone needs that in the process. That old adage of patience is a virtue, in today's world, which is also instantaneous. You're at a bit of a juxtaposition, I think, in 2022 and beyond, of this concept of patience when, we used to getting everything with a click of the fingers. But I think patience is important. I think, being in control of your emotions, I think, is really important. And I said in a previous conversation, allowing 24 hours between conversations, because, it is so emotionally charged when you're talking business with family that, you can feel these emotions rise up in you. And I think you have to give time and space, because often how you felt about something at a given moment is not how you feel about it 24 hours later. You've often, softened your position, found some perspective, can empathize more. So patience, that 24-hour gap, I think, is really important. But I think fundamentally it comes down to it not being worth it, falling out with your family. I posted on LinkedIn about our transition and about that statement, which I said, which was, I'd leave the business before I fell out with mum and dad. And I got probably around 5 or 7 messages from people who said, lovely post, really nice to read it. Unfortunately, it didn't happen like that in our business. It's better now, but we went through a few years of, difficult times. So you sort of felt that sense of regret almost that you let money, business, status, perceived success get in the way of love between your brother, sister, parents, and it's hard in this society to do that, but it isn't worth it in the end, because, your family relationships just go much further than business.
Absolutely. And actually everything that you've said there, I've been writing it down as you were talking, it all comes back to the patience point, doesn't it? Give yourself that time to think about it. 24 hours. We're used to making decisions so quickly. Just have some patience to absorb it, think about it, patience to take the time to plan the succession so you're both comfortable with it. It doesn't have to happen overnight. And actually, if you force it, you probably, as you said, there's kind of 5, 6, 7 people who messaged you. You're probably going to go down that path otherwise.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is, it is perspective. At the end of the day, for me personally, I feel hugely privileged to even have the opportunity to work with my parents. Was already a massive bonus, and it's a huge privilege. And then to become managing director and put my stamp on things, it's a massive privilege. And I try and keep as much perspective as possible. So in times when that stress is coming hard and the emotions are bubbling up and, you're feeling that tension, which is bound to come in succession discussions, I sat back and, thought, well, not doing bad, am I? We're not doing bad here. None of us are doing bad. And me and Dad would often say that. And this is all a bit of a bonus conversation, really, because we're doing all right, aren't we, between us? And that is the truth. We are. I do a lot of self-development, reading books, podcasts, and I read something quite recently that if you, something like £25,000 a year in the UK, you're in the top 1% of earnings in the world. All right, we talk about the 1% in the UK being the ultra-rich billionaires, but zoom out further and from a world perspective, you're already in the 1%, top 1%. So it's keeping perspective. And I think trying to treat that whole succession piece as a privilege, really, and a bit of a bonus. If it don't work, it don't work. But and what you said as well about the push. I listened to a song recently. It's got a lyric: less push, more flow. And I love that because I do think, without sounding too cheesy, life is a bit of a dance. There's rhythms to it. And, sometimes you push certain things that, weren't meant to be. And I think if you let things flow a little bit more naturally, they'll often turn out exactly how they were supposed to be. And we try to adopt a little bit of that in the succession, let it flow and let people have the time. And we got there.
Brilliant. And that brings me to kind of the final 2 quick-fire questions, if that's okay, Gav.
Of course.
Can you tell me your favourite well-known family-run business and the reason why?
Well, yes, I thought about this. It was very interesting. I'm going to fly the flag for SMEs here because there's many big brands that I could talk about. But the one I've always been so impressed with from an SME, it might not be quite well known as such, or maybe it will be, but it's a company called Thomas Fattorini Limited. They're based in head office in Birmingham now, 4 office, but they're a 6th generation family business. Also owned Skipton Castle. But the family split off and they were jewellers originally in the Bradford area where we're based. Another side of the business is like medals, trophies. So they've made the FA Cup. They've made, loads of brilliant things for loads of brilliant organisations. And they've been doing it for years, 6th generation. And we've got to know them a little bit over the years. And I just think they're a brilliant example of a family business. I can't imagine to get to 6 generations. It's some going. Like there's a lot of, there must have been so many tricky conversations across so many generations for that to happen. But they still have such brilliant values. For example, whilst they're based in Birmingham, have got bigger and, more commercially successful, they still use professional advisors, like us, thankfully, one of them, but in Bradford, because that's where the roots were. And I love things like that, and just staying true to certain roots and certain values. So, that's the one I'm going to go for today.
Great choice. I love your reasons why as well. As you say, it's usually the big, well-known brands that, which doing great things, but I like that. That's brilliant. And then final question, and I know you are a real keen self-learner. You do lots of reading, listen to podcasts. But if you could share with us just one podcast or book recommendation that you would recommend for any rising family business leader.
This is so difficult because I've got a list as long as my arm of things. And I've sort of half changed my mind from what I'd previously thought based on our conversation. This isn't a business book at all. But the one that I really enjoy is something called The Book of Joy, which is a transcript really of a conversation between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu about life, about the journey of life, about peace, about living in, such a supercharged technology environment that we live in now. And it's called The Book of Joy, but it's just fun. It's deep. There's lots of wisdom. Yeah, and I think it's brilliant. And along the conversation we've talked about of approaching, certain things in life and certain big situations and other people, I think it's a good one. It's not for everyone, but I'm into all that type of stuff. So I'll go for that.
It's a new one to me, so definitely one for me to check out as well. Thank you so much for that, Gavin. Thanks for your time and openness, really. It's been massively appreciated. So thank you again.
Not at all. Really enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
And that brings the third season of the Exploring Family Business podcast with Mazars to a close. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe to the series and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It will help us to extend our reach to the family business community. Thank you for supporting the third season of Exploring Family Business. I hope you've enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed recording the episodes. We look forward to sharing more with you in the next season.